You always were the neglected one, weren't you? The one nobody bothered to notice. The words, sharp as broken glass, had sliced through the sterile buzz of the reception hall, landing with a thud that silenced the clinking of champagne flutes. I'd paused, mid-chew on a bite of impossibly expensive cake, and looked at her. My sister. My maid of honor. Her eyes, usually darting and insecure, held a glint of something predatory I'd never quite seen before, amplified by the harsh overhead lights. The accusation hung in the air, an invisible stain on the silk of my wedding dress. It was the culmination of decades, a slow-motion unraveling I'd mostly ignored, until that moment. My life before him had been a tapestry woven with muted threads. I was the quiet one. The dependable one. The one who smoothed over family arguments, who remembered birthdays, who always brought the extra napkins. My parents, bless their well-meaning but often oblivious hearts, had always doted on my sister, Sarah. She was the flamboyant one, the one who grabbed attention, the one who seemed to need it more. I was, there. The steady background hum. It wasn't outright cruelty, not usually. Just a pervasive sense of being overlooked. When the inheritance came after my father's unexpected passing, a substantial amount, enough to be comfortable but not ostentatious, Sarah had immediately claimed the lion's share. She'd wept dramatically about her burdens, her needs, while I, in my grief, had simply accepted whatever was left, a fraction of what should have been mine. She'd even negotiated the sale of our childhood home, the one with the creaking porch swing and the ancient oak tree, without so much as a proper consultation with me, her face a mask of pained necessity as she explained how difficult it was to manage everything. I just signed the papers. It was easier than fighting. There were other instances, smaller chips taken from my spirit over the years. Once, at a family reunion, when I'd finally mustered the courage to mention my aspirations of starting a small online business, Sarah had laughed. Not a polite chuckle, but a loud, derisive bark that drew every eye in the garden. You? Start a business? What, selling your collection of dust bunnies? She'd sneered, before turning to regale everyone with a fabricated, embellished tale of her own supposed business acumen, a story that grew grander with each telling. I'd felt the heat rise in my cheeks, the familiar shame of being publicly belittled, and had retreated into myself, my dreams gathering dust like the metaphorical bunnies. Another time, during a particularly tense holiday dinner, when I'd been lamenting my lack of a romantic partner, Sarah had leaned across the table, her voice dripping with feigned sympathy. Oh, darling, she'd cooed, loud enough for everyone to hear, I've tried setting you up, you know. But you're just so difficult to place. So unassuming. It's like trying to find a home for a perfectly good, but utterly unexciting, beige sweater. The table had gone silent, the other guests shifting uncomfortably. I'd felt a familiar ache in my chest, a hollow space where pride should have been. I just smiled weakly, my eyes fixed on my plate. And then there was the wedding. The planning had been a minefield. Sarah, as maid of honor, had taken charge with an iron fist disguised in a velvet glove. Every decision, from the color of the napkins to the choice of the string quartet, was met with her pronouncements and passive-aggressive criticisms. My fiance, Liam, a man of quiet strength and unwavering support, had watched my increasing distress with growing concern. He gently suggested I delegate, that I assert myself, but I'd always found a way to appease Sarah, to avoid the inevitable drama. It was a pattern, ingrained deep. The week before the wedding, Sarah had insisted on a pre-wedding spa day for the bridal party. It was, predictably, a thinly veiled opportunity for her to complain about the cost of everything, to highlight my perceived stinginess. She'd spent hours critiquing my choices, her voice laced with an undercurrent of resentment. Honestly, darling, I don't know how you manage. This dress must have cost a fortune, and for what? To look perfectly pleasant? Liam must be a saint. She'd said it with a saccharine smile, but her eyes held a sharp, assessing gaze. Liam, who was waiting for me outside, had simply squeezed my hand, his presence a silent anchor. The wedding day itself had been a dream, almost. The ceremony was beautiful, Liam's vows were heartfelt, and the reception hall, a grand old estate with soaring ceilings and crystal chandeliers, was everything I'd ever imagined. The air was thick with the scent of roses and expensive perfume, the murmur of happy conversation a pleasant backdrop. I'd felt a sense of profound contentment, a quiet joy that settled deep in my bones. Liam, his arm around my waist, was radiating happiness. We danced our first dance, and I'd felt like the luckiest woman in the world. Then came the speeches. My father, bless him, had been eloquent and moving. Liam's best man had delivered a humorous but touching tribute. And then it was Sarah's turn. She'd taken the microphone, a confident, almost theatrical stride, and begun. Her speech started innocently enough, with fond anecdotes and well wishes. But as she continued, her tone shifted, subtly at first, then more overtly. She spoke of our childhood, of our different paths, and then, with a theatrical sigh, she delivered the line that shattered the illusion of my perfect day, and then there's my dear sister. Always the quiet one, always the backdrop. We used to joke, didn't we? That she was the lonely uncle of the family. Always there, never really part of the main event. The words hung, stark and cruel, in the opulent silence. The laughter that followed was sparse, awkward, a nervous cough in the face of such blatant unkindness. My cheeks flushed hot. Liam's hand tightened on my waist, his thumb stroking my back in a silent gesture of support. But the damage was done. My sister, in front of everyone, had deliberately tried to humiliate me, to diminish my joy, to paint me as the perpetual outsider, even on the happiest day of my life. She looked around, her eyes scanning the room, a smug satisfaction playing on her lips. She expected tears, a public outburst, a confirmation of her narrative. But I just looked at her, and a cold, quiet certainty settled over me. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I didn't make a scene. As Sarah finished her venomous little speech and handed the microphone back with a triumphant flourish, I simply turned to Liam. His face was a mask of concern, but his eyes held an unwavering strength. I leaned in and whispered, "Let's go get that contract." He understood immediately. The contract. The one I'd insisted on, the one Sarah had scoffed at, the one that dictated terms for the sale of our father's business, a significant asset she'd been desperate to liquidate for years. She'd argued it was a burden, that she couldn't be bothered with the details. I'd spent months meticulously drafting it, with the help of a discreet lawyer, ensuring every contingency was covered, every clause ironclad. It was designed to protect my inheritance from her impulsive greed. We excused ourselves from the reception, a hushed, urgent departure that drew confused glances. Liam followed me to the car, his expression unreadable but his presence a solid support. We drove to my lawyer's office, a stark, modern building that felt a world away from the gilded halls of the reception. My lawyer, a formidable woman named Eleanor Vance, was waiting. I didn't say much, just handed her the envelope. "It's time," I said, my voice steady. Eleanor nodded, her gaze sharp. She made a call. Within the hour, two stern-faced men in suits arrived at the reception hall. They found Sarah holding court, still basking in the supposed triumph of her speech. They approached her, their demeanor professional but unyielding. I watched from the car, parked discreetly across the street, as Sarah's confident posture began to falter. Her voice, usually so boisterous, became a panicked squeak. The men presented her with documents. I saw her sign them, her hand trembling. I saw the moment her eyes widened, the dawning realization of what was happening, the sheer terror of her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. She looked around frantically, as if searching for an escape, for an ally, but there was none. She was alone. The men, having secured her signature, left as abruptly as they arrived, leaving behind a stunned and weeping Sarah, her face a grotesque mask of disbelief and despair. The contract, which stipulated that any attempt to undermine the terms or harass the other party would result in immediate forfeiture of her stake in the business, was now irrevocably in effect. Her attempt to humiliate me had triggered the very consequence she'd so desperately tried to avoid. The aftermath was a chaotic symphony of flying monkeys and frantic texts. Sarah's initial calls were filled with rage and disbelief. How could you do this? You manipulative little snake, she shrieked, her voice hoarse. When that didn't elicit the reaction she wanted, she switched tactics, weeping and pleading, begging me to reconsider, to be a good sister. The rest of our family, caught in the crossfire, fractured. Some sided with Sarah, decrying my cruelty and lack of forgiveness. Others, the ones who had quietly witnessed her behavior for years, offered me tentative support, their silence now speaking volumes. Liam, bless him, remained my rock, his calm presence a stark contrast to the family tempest. He never questioned my actions, never told me I was being too harsh. He simply held my hand and reminded me of the love we shared. Sarah's financial ruin was swift and absolute. The business, a lucrative enterprise she had planned to sell off piece by piece, was now firmly in my sole control. Her lavish lifestyle, funded by the illusion of wealth and her ability to extract it from others, imploded. The friends who had flocked to her during her ascendancy disappeared like smoke. Her social standing, built on a foundation of fabricated stories and borrowed prestige, crumbled. The scorn she had so eagerly dished out was now reflected back at her, tenfold. She became the cautionary tale, the woman who let greed and malice consume her. I never saw her again. The last I heard, she was living in a cramped apartment, working a minimum-wage job, her once sharp tongue dulled by hardship and regret. The satisfaction wasn't in her downfall, not entirely. It was in the quiet, undeniable justice. It was in the knowledge that my silence, my endurance, my seemingly passive nature, had been a strength, not a weakness. I had allowed her to believe her narrative, to underestimate me, to weave her own demise. And in the end, all I had to do was present the facts. The tapestry of my life, once woven with muted threads, now shimmered with the quiet brilliance of a well-executed plan.